So what I wanted to explore today is um, a couple of things. The idea of having things, having things that we like, and wanting things, and also not having things um, and not wanting things, and the general idea of sort of becoming attached to things or releasing things, and how that happens in our subjective experience. Um, you know, I think we've all had the experience of really wanting something and for whatever reason not getting it, and that can be upsetting if you really, really, really wanted something. And I think what happens there is we at times we can want something to the degree of an expectation, and it's like, oh, I'm looking forward to this vacation, everything's going to be amazing, and then for whatever reason maybe it gets canceled, and so you can get upset because you had this idea and now it's not there anymore. So it's really a fascinating phenomenon, and I think it's really easy to say, well, if you're not attached to things, then you don't suffer, right? And that's a principle in Buddhism. um, Although I think at times what isn't discussed so much is how to do that, and how to do non-attachment, and also to not live in such a way that you're so detached that you're not really in life. It's pleasurable at times to really enjoy experience and really to be in it. I think the problem comes when we get overly attached to something and don't know how to let go. So what I like to do in my experience is contrast different things. And this is an exercise that we've done before, but in contrasting the way we hold two different thoughts, it can give us insight into how to shift one type of thinking to another. um, I know in another talk I mentioned that when I was in college, I I wanted to do an experiment with my favorite food at the time, dumplings. I wanted to see if I could sort of get past wanting to eat dumplings. Not that it was like, a problem, but I was just curious, if I just let myself eat as many as I wanted, would I get past it? And I think I did. I overdid it, and that can happen certainly with food, where you overindulge to the point where you don't want it anymore. And I think that's a different alternative to letting something go or releasing something. But at that time, I noticed another thought, which was, at times I really wanted to eat dumplings, and I would be like, oh man, but if I can't get them now, I'm a little bit upset because I really wanted to go eat that. And I'm using food as an example, but this extends to anything. Um, so I'll come back to anything in a minute. But what I noticed at the time was, with the idea of something like sushi or lobster, it was so expensive for me at the time that I knew I would just be driving myself crazy if I thought about it. So I didn't sit around pining over it. And I think it's that process of thinking about a thing that you don't have that starts to can bring suffering. It's like, I want this, and I'm really sort of dwelling on the fact that I don't have it, the absence of that thing. And but so with sushi, I just didn't think it. I thought, well, I'm not going to get this, so why drive myself crazy? So I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about it. And but attachment can come in, like I said, it can come in many flavors. It can be being attached to the way things happen. Like that an experience has to go a certain way, or you're going to be upset. It could be becoming attached to a relationship, being overly attached to a goal. um, or a particular job, or a favorite restaurant or a vacation place. I went on a trip, and I was in Japan, and I went to this neighborhood that I like to hang out. And the neighborhood had become very popular. So all of a sudden it was like, it wasn't the way that I remembered it. And I was like, oh man, it was better before. And I was, again, sort of pining over something that wasn't happening. And I think that's where it can be a recipe for, I'm saying suffering, but suffering can be mild, and it can be very deep and profound. And there's a place for suffering, but I really like this idea that there's necessary suffering and unnecessary suffering. Necessary suffering is when something horrible happens, or it can be something small. You stub your toe, you're experiencing pain. There's nothing you can do about that. That's what you would call necessary suffering. Unnecessary suffering is being upset about stubbing your toe and continuing to dwell on it in subsequent times. Someone I know just lost a family member. That's suffering. It's deep and profound. Most people will go through a process of grieving, and in time they will. It's not that they stop missing the person, but they move on from the grieving phase. So how is it that we, what's the sort of thinking mechanism of attachment? I was speaking to a woman, I was modeling a woman about how she was very organized, and she mentioned that she was really good at throwing things away. And when I asked her, I was like, well, how do you do that? How is it that you're good at throwing things away? And she said, I don't store my memories in objects. And I thought, well, that's really interesting. That's fascinating. Because at times I do store memories in objects. Like I'll have something and I'll think, oh, this reminds me of this previous time. And it's funny, the previous time isn't there. The object represents that previous time. But she brings up a great point. You can have memories without having the objects that remind you of them. So that's another way of releasing something is, and you can even release the thought, it's like you don't have to hold on to a previous circumstance. Now, I always like to see two sides to things. So I'm reflecting on the kind of where is it useful to hold on more. And I think rather than the idea of holding on, maybe it's in holding on, we're elevating the importance of something for a moment. And so I think at times, like if you're holding on to an aspiration or holding on to a goal, that can bring a lot of motivation. And I think that can be positive. I was speaking with a colleague on kind of how to have really, really powerful goals that we really want to achieve, and at the same time not be attached to the outcome. And I think that's a sweet spot right there. Is, it's like, I really want this, and I'm gonna give it my all. And at the same time, I can be completely okay if it doesn't happen. And I think that's a really interesting thing to practice on a regular basis. One thing that I do in terms of this attachment thing is just noticing, what am I getting attached to? And again, I'm not saying you shouldn't be attached to anything. Like, it's good to cherish your relationships. It's good to continually build on them. And also keeping in mind this idea that things change, things evolve, and that We don't need to get attached to a particular state of that thing, that relationship, that aspiration, that moment in your life. You know, people get attached to, oh, those were my glory years. You get very attached to that. And although it can be nice to reminisce, it can also stop you from really being present and enjoying what's going on right now. So in terms of ways to practice this, I think the first thing is just noticing any place where you're really, really attached to things being a particular way. And the way to notice that is notice when you're distressed. Notice when you get upset. Notice when you get sad. And you can ask, was there an expectation there? Was there an attachment there? Did something not show up in my world the way I wanted it to? And see to what degree you can let go of that. You know, I'm sure there are, you know, hundreds of thousands of things you're not experiencing right now that you're not upset that you're not experiencing. You know, for these things to bother us, at some point we had to take them on and say, this is important to me. And one way to release it is to say, it's important to me, but I can be equally fine without it. You know, it's like you know, little kids get attached to a blanket, and if someone takes away their blanket, it's like they're in distress. But if they then put their attention somewhere else, it's like the thought of the blanket is gone. So structurally, the way we get upset through attachment is by thinking of the thing and thinking of the not having of that thing. It's like, oh man, I don't have that car that I want to have. That can bother you. As opposed to just like, oh, there are many cars. Some cars I have, some cars I don't have. There's a motorcycle. So once you notice some places, what I like to do is play with actually holding on to it or being more attached to it, and then being less attached and being like, not a big deal. And the way you can take a baseline is, you know, here's a pen, but I really, really, really could care less whether I have this pen or don't have this pen, unless I really needed a pen in that moment. But if I don't have this pen, there's hundreds of other pens. So for me, that's what non-attachment feels like. It's like the pen can be there and the pen cannot be there, and it's totally fine. And if you take that as a thought and contrast it with places where you are attached, you can begin to get clues about how can I hold this other thing in the same way that I hold the pen. And a student in one of the classes I was teaching had a great image. She said, it's like you're holding a pen and then you just let it drop. And I just love, and she uses that gesture to remind her to just let go of things, release them. So I hope you have some fun with that.